Hello everyone, today we're going to look at the game of Arjun versus Shamsilo. So, you open with e4, e5 you get a Ruy Lopez, the main line, and the bishop drops back, still the main line, castles, d6, c3 to build for d4, the bishop develops, getting out of the pin, d4, and now Arjun goes for a bit of a sideline, g6. He just wants to develop his bishop this way, because this is plugged in the other way. Rook 1 develops the bishop and he castles, getting his king to safety. And here comes the knight. Maybe it wants to reroute via that square, or maybe it's b3. So now Arjun takes with the pawn, so now white has this big center. But as we see, Arjun is still in his prep. He is 130 and his opponent is 122, so he is not in his prep anymore. And we see him still making very quick moves. Knight g4, b4, bishop takes, queen takes, and now we see the reroute of the knight. And a very good move, c5. It's also the top engine move, so Arjun knows what he's doing. a6, kicking out the knight, knight comes back, and now d5, closing the center. But this gives this very nice square over here, but not yet, because if you go to e5 you get taken. After take you have a pawn on this square, and you really don't want to get a pawn there, you want a knight there. So the knight goes to h5, looking at these weak squares. Bishop attacks the knight attacks the bishop and the pawn, the bishop defends, and now b5, really nice move, anchoring in the knight, grabbing space at the queen side, and maybe in future ready for this move. First knight kicked out, it dropped back to this square, and now the queen develops and he pushes his a pawn. Good move, because you just want to shove the pawn down, maybe take, open up the rook, or get taken, maybe even take with the knight, attacking the bishop, threatening the bishop pair, and also opening up the rook. The knight comes out. This is the beginning of the advantage that Arjun gets, and here he plays a5, a4, b4, but this move, which square does it give away? This square, so Arjun jumps right in, attacking the queen comes forward, and now the rook develops, putting pressure on the pawn, also securing this square for the future. If a knight will go to that square, the knight wants to trade itself off, but now you can drop the knight back to this square, because he has to give up his bishop. Now we take with the rook, but because, like I said, you don't want a pawn over there. This was possible because this knight moved away, but an intermediate move, c4, attacking the queen, and now we take the bishop, just so he defends this pawn further, because this will be a threat in the future. The rook comes to the center, the other rook puts pressure to this pawn, the rook comes up because he wants to double, the rook moves back because you want to open up the square, so you want to move the queen, and then the knight, the doubling of the rooks, like we see the queen moves over here. So after, because white wants to push this pawn forward to e5, but now this pawn will be hanging. So first he develops the knight, and now we see this reroute. And as we see, there are now 4 pieces stared at this square in front of the pawn. So there will be a lot of pressure on that pawn. The rook just moves up, protecting this, and now the queen slides up, putting a bit of pressure, and the rook just moves back because he thinks, I don't really have any more improving moves, my knights are well placed, my rooks are well placed, and my queen is doing alright over here, controlling this pawn. But Arjun goes for h5, because he wants to get a bit in balance, and he wants to get the game going and play for a win. This gives breathing room to the king. Also, you maybe want to play h5, kick the knight out, but the knight already moves back, and now the rook goes behind the pawn because it wants to escort to go even further. Now the knight jumps in the square, gets taken, and the bishop takes. So you want to move the bishop and you can pile up again against the pawn. We see the knight move back, he wants to reroute again. And now he pushes the pawn, protected by the bishop. So there will be no way to win that pawn, because it will be well defended by bishop, by the rooks, and maybe even by the queen. If this rook moves to c4. So the knight comes back, the bishop drops back, threatening the pawn. Not threatening it because the queen defends it still. And you want to put the knight behind. Now he plays h4, just taking away this square for if the king ever wants to run up, or g3 you can always take. Now the king comes to the center, the queen drops back, and now the rook attacks the pawn, and he says take the pawn, because you cannot really take the pawn, because after take there's rook takes, and there's his move. Bishop takes, of course, because the pawn is still defended by the bishop. So the rook comes back. Arjun also goes with his king to the center. The rook just moves. He's just repeating because he's okay with a draw, but Arjun is not. He's making small improving moves. The king comes up. The rook goes again to this square, and as we see, they had little time on the clock, but after 40 moves they get bonus time. So now they have 30 minutes again. Arjun just shuffling his king around, but now here he goes with the queen, putting pressure to the pawn, so he defends the pawn, but this makes the dark squares in the position a lot weaker. So the king comes back, the rook double stacks, he wanted to push, so that's why he goes in front. The king again, and now the queen looks at these squares and maybe wants to infiltrate. But first he moves the rook, the knight attacks the queen goes to this very nice square where there's pressure on everything. But did Arjun hang the pawn? He didn't, because of this very nice move. f5. You don't want to take, because there's a checkmate. Queen d4 check. And yeah, it says sacrifice the queen, but let's say that the king moves to this square, then there's queen g1, checkmate. And if the king goes to this square, there is queen g1, and after rook e1, it's also checkmate. Oh, checkmate. So that's why you can't take the pawn. So instead he moves the knight back because it was attacked, and now the queen goes in, also looking for this check, which the rook has to block because otherwise it's checkmate, and then you win the knight. So he moves the knight. Now he takes in the center, rook takes, pawn takes, but now there's this check. Instead of this, he had to play something like the computer gives knight e1, and then this is not a good move because the rook is hanging. But that was a way to keep the game going, but instead, this is the position, the knight has to draw back, and now the bishop moves in. It wants to go to this square, threatening a mate, so the rook defends. He still goes to that square, and he sacrifices the knight, because he cannot really do anything about it, because he doesn't have really, let's say, he moves back with the queen, there's c2 check. The computer recommends taking with the queen, because if you take like this, it's checkmate, and if you move your king out of the way, you lose your knight. You cannot even take, because then I will make another queen. So that's why he played king c2, and after bishop takes, taking the rook just moves to a safe square, takes the pawn, takes the rook, check, king moves up, king goes to the center, threatening to promote, check, and a fork, it seems like, but it isn't. Rook blocks. Now the bishop drops back, threatening to go here with the rook and deliver these checks. And this will just be checkmate very soon. Also, you're up a bishop, so that's why White resigned in this position. Arjun is on the top of the leaderboard with 3.5 points out of 5, so that's really good. I hope you enjoyed this Arjun game, and I hope